Let us dive into one of the most powerful books ever written about how we live together, Aristotle's Politics. We are going to explore why Aristotle believes humans are political animals and how he sees the state as a tool for achieving a truly good life. We will break down his 6 types of government, look at why the rule of law and civic virtue are the pillars of a healthy city, and see how these ancient ideas have changed over time and again, leading us right into the digital age. To start, we need to understand the foundation of Aristotle's thinking. In the first book of Politics, Aristotle makes a famous claim. He says that man is by nature a political animal. This is not just a catchy phrase. He is talking about the very essence of what it means to be human. Think about bees or ants. They live in organized groups, but they do only what their instincts tell them to do. Humans are different because we have logos. This is our ability to use rational speech and moral reasoning. It allows us to talk about what is fair and what is unfair. Because we have this gift of reason, we are naturally drawn to live in communities where we can use that reason together. It starts small, with a household and then a village, but it only reaches its peak in the polis, or the city-state. The polis is the only place where humans can be truly self-sufficient and reach their highest potential. But why does the city-state actually matter? For Aristotle, the state is not just a way to keep people safe or help them make money. Instead, it is the environment where citizens can practice virtue and reach eudaimonia. This Greek word means flourishing or living the good life. In his other works, Aristotle describes this flourishing as a life spent acting with virtue. In Politics, he takes this further. He argues that the purpose of the state is not just to keep people alive, but to enable them to live well. Think of laws and public rituals not as tools for control, but as tools for building a better moral character. This creates a deep link between personal ethics and politics. In Aristotle's world, being a good person is not a private hobby. It is something you achieve with others. The habits that make a virtuous citizen, such as courage, self-control, justice, and practical wisdom, are shaped by the laws and education of the city. At the same time, a healthy city depends on citizens who actually possess these virtues. It is like a feedback loop. Good laws help create good people, and good people make sure the laws stay good. This is why Aristotle believed that educating citizens for political life was the most important part of a healthy state. Now, let us look at how Aristotle classifies different types of government. He identifies 3 good forms and 3 bad forms. Each pair has the same basic structure, but they differ in their goal. The good forms are monarchy, aristocracy, and politeia, which is a mixed constitution. In these systems, the people in power govern for the common good of everyone. The bad forms are tyranny, oligarchy, and democracy. In these systems, the rulers only care about their own private interests. It is important to note that when Aristotle says democracy, he is talking about a broken system where the majority rules only for their own benefit, often turning into mob rule. This is very different from the modern liberal democracies we know today, which focus on individual rights and checks and balances. Let us break these regimes down further. A monarchy is when one person rules for the welfare of everyone. But when that ruler starts caring only about their own power and pleasure, they become a tyrant, and the state turns into a place of oppression. An aristocracy is the rule of a few people who are the most virtuous and wise. However, when those few start serving only the wealthy elite, it becomes an oligarchy, and the gap between rich and poor grows wider. Finally, there is politeia. This was Aristotle's ideal. It is a mixed constitution that blends elements of rule by the many and rule by the few. It is anchored by a strong middle class that keeps things balanced. This mixed form prevents the extremes of both the wealthy elite and the angry mob, creating a stable place where laws reflect the interests of everyone. Aristotle also talks about the difference between simple and mixed governments. A simple government represents only one social class. This could be the one person in a monarchy, the few in an aristocracy, or the many in a democracy. A mixed government, on the other hand, includes representation from all 3 classes. This ensures that the laws reflect a wider range of needs and views. This idea was a seed for later thoughts on checks and balances, and the belief that a strong middle class acts as a stabilizer for society. When it comes to stability, Aristotle spends the fifth book analyzing how constitutions change. He asks what policies can stop a government from decaying. For the good regimes, the goal is to keep the law aligned with virtue. For the bad regimes, the goal is to recognize the signs of decline. Aristotle believed that a leader must be able to spot the warning signs of corruption. He wanted to step in and fix things before the entire system collapsed. To stop power from gathering in too few hands, he suggested a few practical tools. He talked about rotating people through different offices, setting strict term limits, and even using ostracism, which is basically voting someone out of the city for a while. These ideas did not just disappear. They echoed through the centuries, shaping everything from the reforms of the Roman Republic to the way we design modern constitutions today. Now, let us look at how this connects to the law. Aristotle famously said that law should be reason without the interference of passion. In the third book of Politics, he explains that human rulers are often swayed by their own biases or personal desires. A well-written law, however, is different. It represents a fair and impartial kind of reason that focuses on what is best for everyone. In this view, law is not just a tool for control. It is a reflection of the community's collective intelligence. When laws are based on virtue, people do not obey them because they are afraid. Instead, they obey because they have a deep, internal respect for justice. This is the root of what we now call the rule of law, the idea that no one, not even the most powerful leader, is above the rules that represent the shared values of the community. But how do we get citizens to think this way? This is where civic education, or paideia, comes in. This is the practical side of the partnership between law and ethics. Aristotle insisted that the state must actively shape the character of its people. He believed this should happen through music, poetry, philosophy, and public debate. By teaching young people to seek the truth, practice moderation, and care about the public interest, the city creates a group of people who can make wise decisions together. You can think of paideia as a training ground for phronses, which is just a fancy word for practical wisdom. It is the skill you need to navigate messy moral and political choices in real life. When it comes to keeping a society stable, Aristotle looked closely at the middle class, known as the mesoi. He noticed a pattern. Societies dominated by the super wealthy tend to turn into oligarchies, where a few people hold all the power. On the other hand, societies with extreme poverty often fall into a type of democracy led by demagogues, or leaders who play on people's emotions. A large, economically secure middle class acts as a stabilizer. They promote moderation, which he called sophrosyne, and reduce the chance of civil strife. Because they have a stake in keeping things steady, the middle class naturally supports a balanced government. They benefit the most when power and resources are distributed fairly. These ancient insights have been studied for a long time, and not everyone agrees with them. Over the centuries, scholars have praised Aristotle, but others have criticized him. Feminist and post-colonial thinkers point out a major flaw. Aristotle's definition of the political animal excluded women, slaves, and anyone who was not Greek. This shows a huge gap in his idea of universalism. However, some modern philosophers believe the core of his idea can still be saved. They argue that the basic concept, that human flourishing requires honest and reasoned discussion in a shared public space, can be made inclusive. For example, Hannah Arendt brought back the idea of the public sphere as a place for action and speech. Nancy Fraser took this further, expanding it to include counterpublics where marginalized voices can finally be heard. Modern democratic theory also relies heavily on the idea that participating in civic life is essential for a fulfilling human life. Thinkers from Rousseau to today's theorists agree that democracy is not just a convenient way to run things, but a moral necessity. Jurgen Habermas built on this tradition. He argues that our modern public sphere, which is shaped by the media, civil society, and digital platforms, can act as a new kind of polis. It is a space where we can still have reasoned debates and decide our own future together. But the digital age brings new problems. Experts in digital democracy are asking if social media actually expands the polis or if it just breaks it into small, angry pieces. We have algorithmic governance now, which promises to make things efficient. But critics warn that this might push aside the ethical reasoning that Aristotle thought was so important. It is a tug of war between technocratic efficiency and the virtue of participating. Some people are trying to build digital polis models. These would combine computer tools with civic education to help people debate better online. They are essentially trying to translate Aristotle's focus on virtue into the language of code and data. Looking back at how Aristotle's Politics was received throughout history, we see a long journey. In ancient times, it was read alongside Plato's Republic and Stoic writings on natural law, helping to shape early Greek political thought. During the Middle Ages, thinkers like Thomas Aquinas blended Aristotelian ethics with Christian theology. They saw the polis as a reflection of a divine order. Then came the Renaissance, which brought a renewed interest in the original Greek texts. Early modern thinkers like James Harrington and Montesquieu used Aristotle's way of categorizing governments as a map to analyze how to balance a constitution. During the Enlightenment, however, things shifted. The rise of social contract theory, led by people like Hobbes and Locke, challenged Aristotle. They focused more on the consent of the governed rather than the idea that humans have an innate, natural purpose to live in a community. By the 20th century, existentialists and critical theorists looked at Aristotle with a more skeptical eye. Martin Heidegger, for instance, questioned whether modern technology had destroyed the very conditions needed for this kind of political life. Aristotle painted a vision of the authentic political being, a creature shaped by community and shared purpose. Yet later thinkers like Adorno and Horkheimer sounded a warning. They argued that reason, when stripped of its moral core and turned into a mere tool, could become a weapon of control rather than a path to freedom. Still, even these sharp critiques circled back to Aristotle's central idea, that human dignity is deeply tied to being part of a community that creates meaning together. Today, scholars continue to breathe new life into Aristotle's ideas. Martha Nussbaum takes his concept of eudaimonia, often translated as human flourishing, and reimagines it as a set of universal human capabilities. She argues that societies should build institutions that help every person develop these abilities, much like a garden designed to let every plant grow strong. Jonathan Barnes points out that Aristotle's rejection of the idea that the state is just a contract between people came long before thinkers like Hobbes. This offers a powerful alternative to modern theories that see government as a cold, calculated agreement. David Keat, meanwhile, shows how Aristotle's view of life as having a purpose gives us a clear way to judge political systems by how well they help people truly thrive. Now, let's piece together the connection Aristotle builds between ethics and politics. In his work Nicomachean Ethics, he lays out the key virtues: courage, temperance, justice, and practical wisdom. These are the qualities that help people do the right thing. Then in politics, he takes those same virtues and asks how they can be woven into the fabric of society. Justice, for example, becomes the guiding principle behind making laws. Courage shows up in citizens who speak truth to power, even when it's hard. Temperance shapes rules that prevent people from taking too much, whether it's food, wealth, or ambition. And practical wisdom, or phronses, guides the discussions in public assemblies and councils. In a well-run city, these virtues aren't just abstract ideas. They're lived out every day, reinforced by education, traditions, and everyone's participation in public life. Think about what it means to be a citizen in Aristotle's world. A citizen isn't just someone who votes. A citizen is someone who takes part in judging, ruling, and debating. This means serving on juries, holding public office for a time, and joining in discussions about the city's future. By rotating these roles and setting term limits, the city stops a small group from holding onto power forever. It also makes sure that many different people get the chance to lead. These ideas feel familiar today, like modern practices such as term limits for leaders or systems that make sure different groups have a voice. They show just how timeless Aristotle's concerns were about keeping power spread out among the people. The rule of law, as Aristotle saw it, is the legal side of virtue. When laws are made with the common good in mind, they do more than just set rules. They teach. They shape habits and character, like a teacher guiding a student. But when laws serve only a few, they break trust and lead to chaos. Aristotle's idea that the good person and the good citizen are one and the same captures this perfectly. In a society where people are virtuous, they follow just laws willingly. There's less need for force or punishment because doing the right thing becomes second nature. But Aristotle's vision isn't without its flaws. First, he left out huge groups of people: women, slaves, and anyone who wasn't Greek. He saw these exclusions as natural, part of the order of things. Later thinkers have tried to separate his useful ideas about human nature from these harmful exclusions, but the original text still carries the weight of its time. Second, the small, close-knit city he imagined doesn't easily translate to today's vast, diverse nations. Critics say it's unrealistic to assume everyone shares the same goals in a society with so many different cultures and beliefs. Third, Aristotle relied on a hierarchy in nature to justify social order, an idea that clashes with modern beliefs in equality and equal rights for all. So how do we bring Aristotle into the 21st century? One approach is to expand his idea of the political animal to a global scale. If every human is political by nature, then every person should have a say in global decisions. Martha Nussbaum's capabilities approach puts this into action. She argues that institutions around the world must support basic human abilities, like staying alive, staying healthy, and getting an education. Another approach looks to deliberative democracy, inspired by thinkers like Eugen Habermas. This means creating spaces where all kinds of voices can come together for rational, respectful discussion. Digital technology offers new ways to do this, though it also risks trapping people in echo chambers or amplifying biases through algorithms. Some experts in civic technology suggest designing online platforms that build in virtues like transparency, accountability, and empathy, turning Aristotle's focus on character into the very design of the tools we use. Looking ahead, the idea of the good life is changing. As climate change, economic inequality, and rapid technological advances reshape our world, so too does our understanding of what it means to flourish. Some argue that eudaimonia must now include taking care of the planet, redefining human thriving to encompass the health of the Earth itself. Others say that the rise of artificial intelligence forces us to rethink what it means to be a citizen in a world we live in an age where machines make more choices for us every day. Algorithms decide what we read, who we meet, and even how we vote. This raises a quiet but urgent question about human judgment. How do we grow wisdom and take responsibility when so much decision-making is handed over to code? A new field called digital civics tries to answer this. It wants to shape our online spaces so they feel less like echo chambers and more like ancient market squares. Think of it like tending a garden instead of building a machine. The goal is to plant the same seeds of fairness, courage, and honesty that philosophers valued thousands of years ago. To understand why this matters, we have to look back at a thinker who saw human connection as the foundation of everything. He believed people are wired to live together. We are social creatures by design. For him, the city was not just a cluster of buildings. It was the only place where a person could truly thrive. Good character starts as a daily habit, but it grows into a shared standard for everyone around you. A healthy system matches the goals of those in charge with the needs of ordinary citizens. Laws, schools, and active participation act like the gears that keep this balance turning. His blueprint had gaps shaped by his own time, yet the heart of it still fuels our conversations today. When we revisit these old ideas and stretch them into our screen-filled world, we learn how to build neighborhoods and networks that let everyone lead a full life. Let us step away from theory and walk through history instead. We can trace how this idea of humans as born partners in society traveled through centuries. Each era picked up the thread and wove it into its own fabric. By watching how different generations tested these concepts, we see both their lasting strength and their ability to bend under pressure. Long before modern democracies took shape, Greek towns ran real-world experiments in living together. One famous thinker sorted governments into neat boxes, praising rule by one, rule by the few, and rule by the many. Life on the ground was far messier and much more interesting. Take Corinth. Its leaders blended strict control by wealthy merchants with open gatherings where regular folks planned religious celebrations. Money moved fast in that port city. That speed forced the rich to sit down and bargain with everyday traders. They built a hybrid way of ruling that looked ahead to a balanced middle path. Power did not rest in just one pair of hands. It shifted and settled among competing groups. Then there was Syracuse. A strongman named Dionysius held power for nearly 40 years. He wrote tough laws and kept a paid army ready at all times. Yet he also poured resources into roads, water channels, and grand stages for plays. These projects gave strangers a reason to call themselves neighbors. Even a harsh regime can accidentally stitch a community together. The old philosopher would warn against this kind of leadership, though. He argued that true stability comes when a leader serves the whole group rather than feeding their own pride. Infrastructure might bind people temporarily, but shared purpose holds them forever. Another town offers a quieter lesson. Megara put its rules on paper very early. Their written charter spelled out who owned land and what local officials owed the public. Coups came and went, but that document survived. It acted like a heavy anchor in stormy seas. A clear set of rules stops a society from swinging wildly between greedy elites and unchecked crowds. This proves a timeless point. Written law must guide the ship, not the passing moods of whoever happens to be steering. These ancient cities function like testing grounds. Leaders tried different mixes of authority, written rules, and public voice. The classic categories show us the outer edges of possibility. Real life usually happened somewhere in the middle. Communities constantly bargained and adjusted, always reaching toward a shared vision of human thriving. Centuries later, the Romans picked up these Greek ideas and made them practical. Their republic ran on a careful division of labor. 2 chief executives shared command. A council of elders advised on policy. Regular citizens gathered to cast votes. Each piece checked the others. A Roman writer named Cicero leaned heavily on the idea of moral excellence. He treated it as the spine of public duty. In his writings, he claimed a nation stays healthy only when its people practice good character. This mirrors the older belief that a good life requires a community. But Cicero pushed further. He spoke of a higher law written into nature itself. He imagined a moral compass that applies everywhere, stretching the old city-centered view into something much wider, cosmopolitan in dimension. This shift paved the way for later Christian philosophers who would fuse Aristotelian ethics with theological doctrines. When Augustus established the system called the Principate, he kept the old Roman republican government structures on the surface, like putting a fresh coat of paint on an old house, while moving all the real power to one person's bedroom. All real power was concentrated in his own hands as emperor. It looked like the rule of law was still fully in place, but the actual way the empire was governed had shifted to rule by one person's personal authority. Aristotle would have called this a clear slide into tyranny, the worst form of government in his view. Even so, Augustus poured massive funding into public building projects and supported writers and artists. He was trying to keep a sense of civic pride and good citizenship alive through culture, even as regular people had less and less say in how the empire was run. During the Middle Ages, Aristotle's work Politics resurfaced in Western Europe. It came back through Arabic translations and commentaries written by scholars like Averroes and Thomas Aquinas. Aquinas in particular blended Aristotle's ideas about purpose and human flourishing with Christian teachings. He argued that the city-state, or polis, exists for a higher goal, guiding people's souls toward God. He redefined Aristotle's concept of eudaimonia, the idea of living a fully good, thriving life, as beatitudo, the blessedness that comes from living virtuously in line with God's rules. In his commentary on Aristotle's Politics, Aquinas stressed that law is a tool for teaching people to be moral. He split law into two types: human law, the rules made by societies, and divine law, the rules set by God. He said fair human laws have to align with that higher moral order from God, like how a local town's park rules have to follow the state's safety laws, which in turn follow national laws. This two-layer idea of law matches Aristotle's belief that laws should help people grow in virtue, but it adds a spiritual layer that wasn't present in the original Greek text. Over in the Islamic Golden Age, scholars like Al-Farabi and Ibn Rushd, known in the West as Averroes, engaged deeply with Aristotle's political thought. Al-Farabi's book, The Virtuous City, lines up with Aristotle's vision of the ideal polis, but he imagined a ruler who embodies both philosophical wisdom and prophetic insight. This mixes rational virtue with spiritual guidance in a way Aristotle never did. Averroes, meanwhile, defended the independence of philosophy against religious interference. He said the pursuit of truth, whether about big spiritual questions or how to run a society, is essential for human flourishing. All these medieval thinkers followed the same pattern. They adjusted Aristotle's ideas to fit their own cultural and religious beliefs. But the core message stayed the same. Laws, education, and community structures all need to nurture virtue in citizens. The Renaissance brought back interest in old classical ideas about republics, inspiring political architects like Niccolò Machiavelli, Jean Bodin, and later John Locke. Machiavelli broke sharply with Aristotle in some ways. He talked about virtue as practical effectiveness, not just moral goodness. But even he agreed that a stable, well-run commonwealth is necessary for people to live well. Locke's second treatise of government directly cites Aristotle when he argues that governments exist to protect life, liberty, and property. These are the modern building blocks of the good life Aristotle described, just updated for a world where individual rights matter more than they did in ancient Greece. The American founding fathers explicitly used Aristotelian concepts. James Madison, in Federalist No. 10, compared political factions to the selfish special interests that can rot a whole political system if they're left unchecked, like a single loud group of friends taking over a school club and making all the decisions only for themselves, ignoring everyone else. He proposed a large republic on purpose, because big countries have so many different groups that no single faction can take over. That's a real-world application of Aristotle's warning that unchecked majority rule in a democracy can devolve into mob tyranny. The U.S. Constitution also splits power between different branches of government, similar to Aristotle's division between the legislative branch that makes laws and the executive branch that carries them out. It's an updated version of his old idea, refined over centuries of political theory. In France, the revolutionary discourse of 1789 wrestled with Aristotle's hierarchy of virtues. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen proclaimed liberty, equality, and fraternity as core values. That echoes the Aristotelian idea that all citizens should be treated as equals in the pursuit of a good life. But the French Revolution also showed the dark side of unbridled democratic excess. The Reign of Terror, where thousands were executed for being labeled enemies of the revolution, is exactly the kind of mob tyranny Aristotle warned could happen if you don't put limits on majority rule, like letting a crowd of angry people make permanent, life-or-death decisions in the heat of the moment, with no one to slow them down or check their power. These Enlightenment experiments highlight a crucial point. Translating Aristotelian political philosophy into modern constitutional design means staying true to his principle that law should shape virtue, while also adapting to new ideas about individual rights and diverse, pluralistic societies. The Industrial Revolution introduced unprecedented social dislocation, pulling people away from tight-knit rural villages and into crowded, noisy factory cities. Workers faced long hours, low pay, and dangerous conditions, and lost the close community ties that used to give life meaning. This huge social upheaval made thinkers go back to Aristotle's emphasis on community and shared purpose as the foundation of a good life. Karl Marx, though fundamentally opposed to Aristotelian metaphysics, shared the conviction that alienation, feeling disconnected from your work, your community, or your own potential, prevents people from achieving eudaimonia, that flourishing life Aristotle wrote about. Marx's critique of capitalist exploitation can be read as a modern extension of Aristotle's concern that the polis must PR. Some thinkers believe the state should simply provide the right conditions so that citizens can use their own reason and reach their full potential. On the other hand, Gustav von Schmaler and the German historical school saw the state differently. They believed in a social version of the state rooted in the spirit of the people, or the Volksgeist. To them, laws should not be forced from the top down. Instead, they should grow naturally, like a tree, following the customs and moral habits of the people. This is very similar to Aristotle's idea that laws must match the actual character of the citizens. This way of thinking helped create the welfare states we see in Europe today. In these systems, the law guarantees basic needs like education, health, and housing. The goal is to make sure people have more than just the bare minimum to survive, allowing them to actually pursue a virtuous and meaningful life. In Japan, the Meiji Restoration of 1868 brought in Western constitutional models, but it kept a strong sense of the national essence, known as kokutai. Japanese scholars picked and chose ideas from Aristotle, specifically focusing on how education, or shugaku, could build loyalty to the state. This created a school system that mixed Confucian ethics with Western liberal ideas. However, when Japan turned toward militarism in the early 20th century, it showed a dark side. The same school system used to build virtue was repurposed to serve a tyrannical vision. This confirms Aristotle's warning that the moral quality of an institution depends entirely on the purpose behind it. Moving into the late 20th and early 21st centuries, democratic theorists like Jürgen Habermas, John Rawls, and Amartya Sen have expanded on Aristotle's ideas about participating in government and living the good life. Habermas talks about the public sphere. Think of this as a modern version of the ancient Greek agora, a town square where people have rational discussions to shape the rules of society. He argues that laws are only legitimate when citizens can talk and agree without being forced. This is a modern way of saying that laws should be internalized through habit and virtue. Then we have John Rawls and his theory of justice. He uses a thought experiment called the original position and the veil of ignorance. Imagine you have to design a society, but you do not know who you will be in that society. You might be rich or poor, healthy or sick. This device helps determine fair rules for how resources are shared. While Rawls does not follow Aristotle's specific view of a final purpose, he still believes a just society must provide primary goods, like security and health. This mirrors Aristotle's link between having basic external goods and being able to develop virtue. Amartya Sen takes this further with his capability approach. He looks directly at eudaimonia, or human flourishing. He defines development not by how much money a person has, but by the freedoms they have to actually do the things they value. This brings back Aristotle's holistic view. Flourishing is not just about wealth or pleasure. It is about the ability to make reasoned choices within a supportive community. At the same time, globalization is forcing us to rethink the polis, or the city-state, beyond national borders. International groups like the United Nations and the European Union try to create legal systems that protect human rights and the environment for everyone. Some critics say these big organizations lack the close, personal bonds needed to build true civic virtue. But supporters argue that a cosmopolitan society, guided by shared ethics, can extend the goal of human flourishing to the entire world. This can work as long as global governance includes real participation and accountability. One of the most urgent ways we are updating Aristotle's ideas is by including the planet in our definition of the good life. Traditional Aristotelian ethics focused on flourishing within a human city. But today, philosophers argue that true flourishing is impossible without a healthy planet. Brian Norton and David Schmitz suggest a planetary virtue ethics. In this view, taking care of the environment becomes a core virtue, just like justice or courage. We see this in policy efforts like the Paris Agreement. This is an early form of global law that tries to align the interests of different nations with the health of the earth. These agreements try to apply the Aristotelian principle that law should lead citizens toward the common good. In this case, the common good is stopping climate risk. However, it is hard to enforce. National pride, unequal wealth, and short-term political goals make it difficult to build civic virtue on a global scale. Some scholars suggest that we should put climate literacy into school lessons. Just as Aristotle advocated for paideia, or a complete education, this would raise a generation that sees protecting nature as a key part of personal and community flourishing. Finally, the rise of artificial intelligence and algorithmic governance creates a brand new arena. It tests Aristotle's claim that political virtue is something that must be cultivated. Politics is about how we actively participate in making decisions together. Today, platforms like social media, online shops, and automated government services handle many parts of our civic lives. This raises a big question. Can computer algorithms help or hurt our sense of practical wisdom? Researchers in the field of digital civics are suggesting ways to build software that reflects ancient virtues. For example, there are apps for participatory budgeting that allow citizens to decide how to spend city money. This lets people practice using their judgment and taking responsibility in a clear way. There are also transparency dashboards that show users exactly how decisions are made. These tools help people think critically and stay skeptical, which are vital traits needed to avoid being manipulated by dishonest leaders. On the other hand, filter bubbles and personalized news feeds threaten the ideal of open discussion. These tools narrow what we see, showing only viewpoints we already agree with. This echo chamber effect can damage the public conversation that Aristotle believed was essential for growing morally. To fix this, some experts suggest institutional nudges. These are small pushes that intentionally show users opposing views. This encourages people to practice logical reasoning, which is like a modern version of the famous dialogues that shaped virtue in ancient Athens. The rise of artificial intelligence in voting systems also brings deep ethical questions. If a machine can predict what a voter wants with high accuracy, should it help design the ballot? Or is this an unfair intrusion into a person's ability to judge for themselves? Aristotle would likely warn that relying on outside tools must not replace the building of habits that create true virtue. If we let that happen, the city risks becoming a system run by experts who lack any moral soul. Aristotle placed a lot of importance on education as the main way to shape good citizens. Modern teachers have responded by creating lessons that mix mental skills with character building. Some programs focus on 6 pillars of character, which include trustworthiness, respect, responsibility, fairness, caring, and citizenship. These map very closely onto the ancient virtues of wisdom, courage, self-control, and justice. In Finland, the national school system focuses on learning together, asking deep questions, and doing projects that connect students to their local government. This reflects the belief that habit, practicing something over and over again within a community, creates a stable personality. Similarly, service learning programs in universities around the world require students to face community challenges directly. This turns abstract ethical ideas into real actions. However, some critics worry about whether these programs can work for everyone in unequal societies. Unfair access to good education can widen the gap in social connections, which hurts the goal of a fair society. Fixing this requires policy changes to ensure early education for all children, fair funding, and better training for teachers. These teachers should focus on leading moral conversations rather than just handing out information. Aristotle warned that a constitution must be neither too stiff nor too loose. If it is, it might be taken over by a small wealthy group or fall into chaos. Modern designers of government systems try to find this balance using tools like independent courts, two-house legislatures, and limits on how long leaders can serve. The German Federal Constitutional Court is a great example of a body that protects the Constitution while still allowing for modern interpretations. This is a modern version of the idea that law should adapt to the changing common good without giving in to party politics. Likewise, Swiss direct democracy combines frequent voting with a strong regional system. This offers a model for keeping power with the people while spreading it out so that the majority cannot bully the minority. In contrast, authoritarian regimes that pretend to follow a constitution often twist the law to justify cracking down. They use emergency powers to take away freedoms under the excuse of national security. This shows how the literal words of the law can be very different from its true spirit, a gap Aristotle would call a betrayal of the ultimate purpose of the city. New civic technology platforms try to put the vision of an engaged citizenry into action. Projects like OpenGov, Decidum, and Participedia provide open tools for budget transparency, planning, and sharing knowledge about democratic ideas. By making it easier to get involved, these technologies empower MAR by bringing in groups of people who are usually left out. We can open up policy discussions to everyone. This expands the political community so it is no longer just a small club for the elites. Research shows that when regular people feel their voice actually changes things, they start to trust their institutions again. This trust is the secret ingredient for civic virtue, which is basically the desire to do what is best for the community. However, for these digital platforms to actually work, we need a few things in place. People need digital literacy, which is like having a map to navigate the internet. They also need fair access to the web and strong data protection. Without these, privacy disappears and the system becomes easy to manipulate. Now, let us look toward the future of the polis. We are moving toward what we can call a pluralistic cosmopolis. Think of this as a giant network of overlapping communities. These groups are tied together by shared values and a sense of duty to one another. Aristotle believed that a community needs a common purpose to survive. That idea is still true today, but the scale has changed. Instead of one single city-state, that purpose now stretches across local, regional, and even planetary levels. But getting there will not be easy. We face four major hurdles. First, we must cultivate transnational virtue. This means creating education that teaches us to feel responsible for people living far away and for the generations not yet born. Second, we need adaptive legal systems. Laws should be like flexible tools that can react quickly to new technology without throwing fairness out the window. Third, we must ensure inclusive participation. We can use digital tools to give a voice to people who have been silenced for centuries, which makes the overall conversation much richer. Finally, we have to balance autonomy and coordination. Local towns should still be able to make their own choices, but they must also work together on big problems like climate change that do not stop at a border. If we can solve these problems, the project of eudaimonia, or human flourishing, can become a global reality. It honors the old insight that humans are social creatures. We find our highest fulfillment when we work together in a virtuous way. Looking back, Aristotle's Politics is still a powerful jumping-off point. It helps us question how we organize our societies, how laws work, and how we build character. We have seen his ideas change over time. They started in the busy marketplaces of ancient Greece, moved through the grand halls of Rome, and lived in the quiet monasteries of the Middle Ages. They fueled the fire of the Enlightenment and survived the chaos of the Industrial Revolution. Now, they exist in our world of algorithms. Through all this time, there has been a constant tug of war between power and principle, order and freedom, and personal ambition versus the good of the group. The real value of Aristotle is not that he gave us a step-by-step manual for government. Instead, he gave us a lens to see the world. He taught us to ask why we organize ourselves the way we do and what goals we are actually chasing. He showed us how to build institutions that help every human reach their full potential. As we face global challenges we have never seen before, this lens helps us imagine new types of communities. Whether they are digital, ecological, or planetary, they are all built on one timeless belief. A just society is one where every single citizen has the chance to live a meaningful and flourishing life.